My name is Sierra. I am the Learning Experiences Manager here at Fort Collins Museum of Discovery, and I am so excited to have you all with me tonight for another Discovery Live Ask a Therapist. Discovery Live is FCMoD's ongoing virtual speaker series where we bring the experts to you. If you have any questions for our speakers tonight during the program, feel free to leave them below in the comments and we'll get them answered for you. Tonight, in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, we have two incredible speakers who are going to join me in just a minute, and we are going to talk all about the ins and outs of therapy. All right, let me go ahead and bring them on here. We have Lauren Stanley and Carl Nassar. Lauren, Carl, welcome.
Thanks, Sierra.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Glad to be here with you.
Thank you both for joining us tonight. I am so excited to get to chat with you about the amazing work that you both do. To kick us off, do you mind giving all of our viewers just a short introduction, who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Lauren, do you want to start and I'll follow you?
Sure. So I'm Lauren Stanley. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I am also the clinical director here in Colorado for LifeStance Health, formerly Heart-Centered Counseling. And I am from Texas. That's where I started off, and my specialty is in substance use disorders. So I have a real passion for working with that population. But as most of us therapists do, I work with all sorts of folks struggling with all kinds of things. And I've been working with Carl here for about 6 years.
Wow, it's been 6 years, Lauren. My
Yeah.
time goes by.
5.5. We'll round up though.
And I'm Carl. I'm Dr. Carl Nassar. I tell people I got to counseling the very long way. I got a bachelor's, master's, doctorate in electrical computer engineering from McGill University in Montreal. Hopped on a plane with my wife, moved to Fort Collins, Colorado, when they offered me a tenure track position in the engineering department at CSU. Stayed there about 7 years, earned tenure. I decided I liked working with people more than with numbers. I got new degrees in counseling psychology, ran a private practice here in town for 10 to 15 years, and excuse me, decided I'd grow that into a group practice. And we ended up growing Heart-Centered Counseling into a practice of over 300 employees, over 250 providers. A year ago, we joined with the LifeStance Health family, and Heart-Centered Counseling became LifeStance Health. And here I am on this very diverse life journey, and very happy to be here with you, Sierra, and very happy to have you on the journey for 5 years, Lauren.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you both. So we're here to talk about therapy tonight. I feel like it's a big word, and for some people, maybe an intimidating word. But we're going to break down all those stigmas.
Yes. Sounds perfect. It's a really good time to talk about therapy, pandemic world, and hopefully soon to be post-pandemic world, little by little.
Yes, fingers crossed. So to kick us off, what is therapy? When we hear that word, when we throw it out there, what are we talking about?
Yeah, let me tell you what jumps to my mind as a starting point, and then Lauren, you can help me in this conversation. And I apologize for clearing my throat. Seems to be something stuck in my throat here. So, one of my teachers liked to say, I've never done therapy. I've only had important conversations. And I think that's a lovely way to talk about therapy. When I think of therapy, I think of it this way. I think that we live in a world that moves very quickly. And we all have a lot of pressures and a lot of demands on us, whether they are from our kids or our spouses or our employers, or demands we put on ourselves to perform or look a certain way. We live in a world with a lot of pressures. Therapy is an opportunity to enter into space where you're really welcome to just slow down, and we really want to take the time for you, and really make room for you to be able to slow down into what I might call kind of move from a rhythm of anxiety to a rhythm of compassion and empathy, and really allow you to sink into a more vulnerable space so that you can really share all of who you are in a much more, perhaps, in a space where it can be greeted with a lot of tenderness, a lot of compassion, a lot of empathy, And along the way, the aches and pains that perhaps you've been carrying with you can come out, and we can hold those in a really caring way. And from that place of holding a caring way, come to gain understanding. And as we understand more, come to figure out what healing might look like and support you on a healing journey. So your life becomes your best life instead of the life you've stumbled into. That's how I would describe it in this moment. Lauren, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. So just to add on to that, because I think all of that is really valid and poignant, is that therapy can mean so many different things, but I think a core that runs through all of those things is connection. And that regardless of what the piece that you are looking for and what the wound may be that you are looking to find healing in, is that connection is often at the heart of that. And so many people may not have had the experience of a safe or a loving or very secure connection. And when you find that person who you can sit in a room with and feel like, oh, wow, I have the ability to really feel like this person not only understands me, but really wants to hear my story. And I have the ability to open up to them and expose some of these parts of myself that maybe feel a little bit broken. And, some people kind of bristle at the word broken, and they really don't like the idea that there may be parts of themselves that are broken. But I really feel like it's okay to use that word. And the reason is because those parts of ourselves that may have a bit of brokenness, when we go through that healing process, we have the ability to grow stronger in those places that we were once broken. And the therapist can sit with you in that space and allow you to go through the process of strengthening where you can walk out on the other side.
Yeah, and I'll add one part to that, and then Sarah, I'll promise that you ask another question, because I'm sure you have more than one. Because we probably spend the whole hour talking about this one back and forth. One of the statements that one of my teachers used to say is, the wounding happens in relationship, and the healing happens in relationship.
Yeah.
And therapy is really about creating a relationship in which healing can happen.
That's great. Thank you both. Lauren, I really appreciate what you said about the term broken and owning that and using that. I think words have so much importance for us, and sometimes it can be hard to name things for ourselves. But that's a really important part of working through things, is being able to name it and owning that. So I think that's really great. And I love too this idea that therapy is all about connection and relationship, and really being with another person, finding that empathy, finding that connection to another human being. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. And therapists are people as well, right? And just like we all have our own imperfections and personalities, you may not connect to one particular therapist, but you might connect to another one really well. And going back to that word broken, maybe a therapist who uses the word broken and you bristle at that, maybe that's not the therapist for you. Maybe you find a therapist who doesn't use the word broken. That's okay, right? I think it's all right to go and find that person who uses a language that really resonates with you.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, along that line, Lauren, I think you're speaking to something that probably you and I have both experienced, which is the person will say, "Well, I've tried therapy and it didn't work," I'm always impressed by people who have gone in, had an experience with a particular provider, and then are willing to try. Say, okay, maybe it isn't that therapy doesn't work. Maybe it's that wasn't the best clinician for me, and let me go try again, because I'm really committed to my healing process. And therapy has all the data behind it that says it's very effective as a way to heal our emotional and relational wounds, and to stick in there until you find that person that you really feel you connect with in a way that's meaningful.
So speaking of finding that person, what how do you choose the right therapist? What's your process there? Or really, I mean, how do you find a therapist to begin with?
It's a really good question.
Yeah. Do you want to start, Lauren, or do you like me to?
Sure, I can dive in there. This could look a lot of different ways. So, if we're talking in really practical terms, how you find a therapist could look like going on the internet and doing a Google search or looking on Psychology Today. There are a lot of different forums where therapists have listings, and you can simply search through and see, gosh, I like the way that person looks. I've had people tell me that you have a nice face, and I think that I would like to talk to you. And I'm like, great, well, let's go ahead and get to know each other. Or maybe you read somebody's profile and the words they use or the way they describe themselves and their background really sinks in, and you think, that seems like the right person for me. Maybe there's something you're looking for. You can use those profiles to figure that out. And of course, you can look for an agency and call the phone number and get yourself scheduled, right? And then you can have consultations with people, and you don't have to commit to the first person that you sit down with. When I meet with somebody, I like to let them know this is a process of getting to know each other. I want to get to know you and find out if I feel like I can meet your needs, but I also want you to decide if you think that I am that person for you. So there's a lot to explore with each other. And I want somebody to feel like I am the right fit for them, not just that I think, I have the skill set or the background to help treat whatever it is that they have happening in their life. Carl, what would you add to that?
I think the piece I'd add is trust what you feel. You know, when you come and you sit down, you want to make sure the space feels safe for you. You feel comfortable. That this is a place where you come and you can feel like, okay, I can really unfold here. I can really I think this is a place where I could test the boundaries of my vulnerability and let this person in. Just trust that felt experience of safety and as a sort of guidepost for you. And don't push yourself to have to be somewhere that doesn't feel like it might be the right place for you. Trust that knowing that you have in the process. And feel free to ask the clinician whatever question you want to as you're finding your way. Don't be scared to say, I don't like the word broken. I don't understand why you use that word. Tell me more. It's okay that this is a process for both of you, and feel safe enough to test the relationship to see, does it have room for you? Instead of, as soon as it doesn't feel comfortable, it isn't in the right place, maybe just test that a little bit more. Dip your feet in those waters and see, does the relationship make room for me if I give the relationship some input, and what happens?
And just Carl, just because I have to dive into this because I love this so much. I love it when somebody has the ability to say, I didn't like it when you said that. Or even if it's a session later, hey, last time it hurt my feelings when you said this, or you know what, I think you really misunderstood me in this moment. Because then we have the chance to talk it out and to explore what happened in that moment and to build understanding, right? So sometimes I'll even have friends or family say something like, I'm working with this therapist and I really think they're missing the mark, or I feel like they just don't get me. And so my first question will always be, have you let them know that that's how you feel? Because sometimes they although therapists are often innately intuitive, we're still not mind readers. And sometimes all we need is a little glimpse inside, and then we can really explore that. And often that feedback is so welcome. It is really acceptable to be able to say, hey, I'm not a fan of what you said.
And to take that one step further, and I warned you, Sierra, in the pre-meeting that we could just keep going on any one topic forever. You take that one step further. People oftentimes never had a chance to learn about relational repair. They never had a chance to learn that they could go ahead in relationship and lean in and say, I didn't like that. I didn't feel very good, and that could be reparative. And so to have that courage to say to your therapist, I didn't like that, or that didn't land well, and to allow your therapist to work with you to create repair is really meaningful, not only in repairing the damage that may have been done in the therapeutic relationship, but in helping that person understand that the process of relational repair is possible. And so we often live in a culture where we have match.coms. And so we can sort of relationship shop, and we sort of feel like, well, if the relationship gets hard, I can throw it out and get a new one. Versus if this relationship gets hard, what does it look like for me to stay with this and see if repair is possible and see what growth might happen, how this relationship might deepen instead of it being discarded in some way.
That's great. Thank you. Listening to you two talk, I think I heard you talk about a therapist as like a teammate, tackling it with you. I feel like you talked about them as someone to practice with, to test things and walk through things with. It just sounds like there's a lot of different opportunities to really have this person that you can connect with and talk through all of these different pieces of life and relationships with that is maybe more anxiety inducing or challenging outside of that safe and vulnerable space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'd add one piece to that I think is really important. And this is a metaphor I use many times. Sierra, if you broke your leg, and you started walking around on a broken leg, limping everywhere, somebody would stop you and they would say, "Why are you walking around with a broken leg?" And you'd say, "Well, because I broke it, so I'm just limping along." They would say, "Well, for goodness sake, Sierra, go to the doctor, get a cast. We know how to repair that. We know how to help you with your healing journey on that. Go get it put in the cast, and 2-3 weeks later, it'll heal." And yet, people walk around with broken hearts all the time, and imagine somehow that's normal. Well, that's just what we do. We're all brokenhearted, and we all have to walk around with broken hearts all the time. And I think we know how to heal broken hearts. I'm not saying there's a magic pill and we give it to you and your broken heart is gone. Just like I don't give you a magic pill and your broken leg is gone. But we know the process of healing and how to support you in healing from that broken heart and the depression or anxiety or whatever it might be that's created, that's caused you in your life. And so therapy is really a place where we can support you in that really important healing journey so that you don't have to walk around with a broken leg or a broken heart anymore.
I love that. That's beautiful, Carl.
Can't say it any better than that.
So we have our first viewer question. And I want to elaborate on this a little bit. So there are therapists and there are counselors and there are psychologists and there are psychiatrists and all these different terms that we hear. Are these all the same profession? Are these all different variations on the same profession? Completely different? Can you guys talk a little bit about all these different terms we'll hear?
Absolutely. Lauren, do you want to take the lead there and I'll follow you?
Sure. This actually comes up quite a lot. So a psychiatrist is somebody who can prescribe medication. That's the primary difference. I'll save the nitty gritty nuances here, but that's the primary difference is a psychiatrist can prescribe medication. All the other terms you described are in the therapy realm. They're different flavors of therapist. A psychologist has a doctoral level of education, and a counselor, a therapist, so those are all interchangeable terms, right? So a psychologist is speaking to a level of education, and then a therapist or a counselor can describe really anybody who practices therapy.
Yeah. And I'll just add a little bit, just to add a little bit more information to that. So, practicing psychotherapists, to throw in one more term, typically will all have a master's or doctorate level, and to get licensed, fully licensed, usually require about 1,000 or 2,000 practicing hours following that graduate degree. The state has some different licensure categories, and four of these categories, roughly do the same scope of work. And those are licensed professional counselors, licensed marriage and family therapists, licensed clinical social workers, and licensed psychologists. And we will all support people in healing their depression, their anxiety, whatever it might be that they're struggling with. None of those are licensed to prescribe medication. Psychiatrists have medical degrees and then post-medical training in the field of psychiatry, and they are prescribers of meds. And so, what we know is that if you take something like depression, we know that talk therapy as a standalone, I forget the exact number, it's somewhere in the order of 75% effective in supporting people in their healing of depression. We know meds alone are only something like 33% effective. I'm sure there's going to be a med company that's going to call me after this and correct that number, but it's a lower percentage. And we also know that meds and talk therapy together have the highest efficacy. I forget what that number is. It's something like 88% or something. There's no bad road to take healing. And, whatever you do, I think people do what they feel is best for them. Certainly Lauren and I'm going to speak for Lauren for a moment, want to support people in doing whatever they feel is best. But being a talk therapist myself and having seen the efficacy of it, and how we can support people in healing both what's ailing them in the moment, but also perhaps some of the deeper ones as well that may be there. I always want to encourage people to give talk therapy a try, because I just think that having lived for 20 years, I've just watched people's lives transform.
And speaking to the efficacy question, I think this is something I mentioned the last time we were on here. And when I said it, I was like, oh, that's smart. So I'm going to say it again. and that was the fact that, we all know a lot about insurance, right? And insurance can be a little fickle. And the fact that insurance reimburses very well and commonly for talk therapy shows that it has outcomes, because insurance does not pay for something that doesn't have outcomes. And so that just really speaks to the fact that talk therapy works, right? And so sure, there's not anything in this world that's a one size fits all. But when you look at insurance and what we know about insurance, the fact that nearly every payer will support in some form or fashion talk therapy, that's something that you can really hold out as like, man, there's something to it.
That's great. Thank you. It's really, you two are so knowledgeable about all of this. No surprise there, right? But if one of our viewers comes out of this and says, oh my gosh, all right, I'm a changed person, I need to become a therapist, I want to do this work, how do they do that? What are the steps to becoming a licensed therapist?
Well, so in addition to the categories that Carl described, there are some other types of helping professionals that don't require first a 4-year bachelor's degree. So when we were talking about licensed professional counselor and licensed clinical social worker, those all require first a 4-year degree. That doesn't necessarily have to be in a psychology or a humanities study, right? You could have an associate's degree and then pursue Carl, what does CAC stand for? Certified Addiction Counselor. Mm-hmm. So there are some helping professional pathways that you could pursue that don't require those other degrees. But typically, when we're talking about a therapist, like Carl described, you would have a 4-year degree. And so say somebody is listening and they already have that 4-year degree, then they would consider pursuing a graduate degree in either social work or mental health counseling or marriage and family therapy. And then that would really set them on their course, and it would help lead them the rest of the way. Once they graduate with that degree, then they will have their practicum and internships and all their hours to accumulate afterward. But it's really getting into that graduate program that will set you on your way for the rest of it.
And I have a couple of pieces. I think one of the things, if you want to be a therapist, is be in therapy. There's something very meaningful about having the lived experience of being that client, especially if you're working with a skilled therapist, and just going through your own healing journey. That really informs the felt experience of becoming a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you want to be a therapist, I mean, for me, it was a second career. The really nice part about it is it really doesn't matter what your 4-year degree was in. It
Mm-hmm.
can be political science, it can be engineering.
Mine's in business.
But you can apply to a graduate program, even an undergraduate in psychology. And most of these counseling programs will admit anybody not admit anybody, but will admit you regardless of what area your 4-year degree is in. And then it's typically a 2-year program to get there. And UNC here in Colorado, I believe they still have it, has a weekend program. So you could still work your regular job, and they do a class. The class is done in 2 weekends. So you go down for 1 weekend in Denver, skip a week, and go down for another weekend. That ends your class. You take your courses on weekends if you happen to be a working professional who doesn't want to stop your day job to career switch as well.
And that's really often how many people realize that they want to be therapists, is their own therapy process. And then kind of on the flip side of that, sometimes therapists themselves realize that they're struggling in their profession. And sometimes what I've noticed just anecdotally is it seems like sometimes those therapists who are struggling in their own professional process in working with those people to help them in whatever way that looks like to get them in a better place, I've discovered that they have either had a very limited therapy experience or they haven't had one at all. And what that's looked like is a gentle encouragement around what might it be like to enter your own therapy process, because it ends up being very, very helpful for their own profession.
Yeah, one of the things that I've often heard is that we can only help our clients to the extent to which we ourselves have healed.
Yeah.
And I do see that a lot of therapists that I know have entered into the field because of the healing journey they underwent, usually with a therapist that they had a deep connection with. And that was so meaningful for them. It transformed their lives. It broke them out of the addiction, whether that was an alcohol addiction or a work addiction or an addiction to escaping life in whatever way that was, and really brought them back to themselves and to really being able to engage more richly in life. And they said, this is the real stuff. And I want everybody to have this real stuff too, to be able to be vulnerable and human and to really experience themselves in relationship and not to hide behind a compliant self or a social self. And suddenly, as they make that transformation, they want to give that. People are kind, right? People are fundamentally good people, and we want to give to people what is so rich for ourselves. And so people have had this rich experience, want to find a way to give that back. I think that inspires a lot of people to become therapists.
Absolutely. And Carl and I have talked about this process of becoming clinicians ourselves. And I think it's like once you get a taste of giving that to someone, it's like it's so good that how can you envision doing something else? It's just so fulfilling. It's so meaningful to watch somebody else go through that process that you yourself have gone through. It's pretty amazing and indescribable. And I think that's what a lot of people end up feeling who feel drawn to joining the therapy profession.
Yeah. Just don't try to be a therapist, your own wife or husband. It really doesn't work that well.
I can see that. Well, that leads me to another question. I was doing a little bit of Googling before this to prepare myself. And I kept running into this question of, if I can get advice from my spouse or my family or my friends, why would I need to go see a therapist?
It's very hard to get what you need from somebody that close to your inner circle. It is very, very hard. It takes somebody removed from your inner circle to be able to share observations about dynamics that there's a reactivity whenever it's somebody close to you. And when it's somebody who doesn't have that same connection, like is your mother or your partner, right? You hear it in a different way. It is amazing how the information comes to you when a different person shares it.
Yeah, I would add a little bit to that. Thank you, Lauren. At the end of the day, Sierra, the answer that most people want is the answer that's really truest to their heart, right? And you want the answer that's really deepest in your own heart. And I think that what happens in the therapy space is we really make the room to listen to what is heartfelt and heart-centered for you. And in the process of having that exploration, that conversation, you discover for yourself what is truly in your heart, and find your own answer in the relational process. And and that can take time. It might take us an hour, a week, a week for a few weeks to get there. With your spouse, with your mom, you're all busy, right? You all have things you need to get to. There's, and so this is about really taking the time to make sure that the answer you come up with is really your deepest answer. And these are important questions, right? Do I want to stay in my marriage? Do I want to switch careers? How do I live a more meaningful life? And you don't want to sit in the therapy room, come in and have me tell you in 5 minutes what I think the answer is, because I don't know you in 5 minutes. You want me to take the time and really support you in coming to know your own answer in a really full, rich way, so that when you make that decision, you're really committed behind it, and you have from that place the ability to follow through on that decision.
And really therapy is less about advice giving and more about processing. And so, sometimes when somebody comes in and says, I want you to tell me what to do, then there's a lot of exploration around, well, let's talk about the feeling of the need to be told. Tell me what the answer is. And really underneath that is this desire for things to just be better. But usually we don't end up in therapy because there is a simple problem, right? A simple problem would have a simple solution. And that's not why you end up walking into the therapist's office, right? So there's usually a much more complex process underneath that.
Absolutely. Sierra, I could keep going, Lauren, but I feel the need to pause so that you come in here as well.
Thank you. No, I feel like I am learning so much right now, listening to you two go back and forth. But we do have another audience question, and I'm going to turn us a little bit to the pandemic. So it would not be Discovery Live and a conversation about therapy without talking about the pandemic. So this question is, as we come out of the pandemic, I'm feeling a bit of inertia to get back to normal. What advice can you offer to people feeling this way? And I think a lot of us are feeling this right now, this tug between being in such a state of the unknown for so long, and then starting to see things opening back up, people going maskless in public. Things that a year ago we wanted so badly, but after, the year in the pandemic, we're really cautious and not quite sure, maybe even what normal is. So what advice do you have?
I would say my first thought just goes to, like, if we're just talking about really practical, like coping skill wise, the first thing that I would want to share is to think about in what ways can you help yourself feel in charge, right? Because it feels scary. Like I think because we've had to be in such a small container for so long, our world has really shrunk down to being really limited in many ways. And even though that in some ways has been upsetting and inconvenient and so limiting, it's come with all kinds of things that we don't like. In other ways, it has also felt really, really safe. Here is my world and I can see everything in it and I know exactly what's going on here. And so with the idea of that opening up, it feels really scary. It probably feels a little chaotic and it feels uncertain. So I think number one, it is good to challenge ourselves to let things open up and to do new things and get back out into the world. And if possible, depending on what your circumstances are, that can be measured. You don't have to go full force. So in what ways can I be a little bit in charge of the pace at which that unfolds? Who are the people I'm going to seek to be around in this very early phase of reopening? So I would just probably encourage people to figure out, how can I still feel like I'm in the driver's seat in this process, rather than letting these external factors really dictate how quickly I feel thrown back into the world.
Yeah, Lauren, I think that's lovely. I'm gonna add just a little bit to that. I would say take your time. There's no hurry. It's okay for you to do it in a way that is on your terms, not somebody else's. Uh, you know, um, we don't know. It's different. Things are opening up, and they're opening up in uneven ways and in ways that aren't always clear. It's okay not to know, and to let experience guide you, and to slow down enough to sort of figure it out as you go, instead of somehow being able to know, right? Pre-pandemic, there was a little bit more certainty as to, well, I don't wear a mask because why would I wear a mask? During the pandemic, it was pretty clear. Later on, presumably, in most cases, want to wear a mask. Now is, do I wear a mask? Don't I wear a mask? Where do I wear a mask? See, they're not wearing a mask. Should I wear the mask? And there's a lot. There's less that's known at this point, so it's okay to slow down. Realize that you may not have a way to know until you have the experience of, and just allow the experience to be your guide, as opposed to having to walk in the experience already knowing. And that doing that means learning to live with a little bit of uncertainty, and therefore learning to live with a little bit more anxiety. And that we don't have to resolve our anxiety right away in order to feel okay. That I can have a little bit of anxiety and not knowing, and that can be all right. I can be okay with that. And to just bring that self-compassion around, yep, I'm a little more scared, I'm a little more anxious, I don't know what to do, and that's okay. I'm just going to figure it out as I go, and whatever happens, I'll be all right. And just allowing that slowness that allows for some self-compassion and reassurance, self-reassurance in this process.
That's great. Thank you. Along the lines of the pandemic, because we're in it now, I am sure that you have seen a lot of changes in the last year between, therapy pre-pandemic and therapy post, or actually maybe not. I guess I shouldn't make that assumption. But I know that, teletherapy has been kind of a hot topic recently, in the last year, and may still be in the future. Can you guys speak a little bit to what changes you've seen since, pre and post pandemic in the world of therapy, and kind of what you've noticed, what has changed, what you think might be here to stay as we move out of it?
Carl, that would be really great for you to speak to, I think.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Let me answer that in two parts. The part around just the pragmatics of therapy, and then the part around the content of therapy. From a pragmatic perspective, pre-pandemic, our organization was trying to encourage teletherapy, because we were trying to reach the rural Colorado and trying to reach people that wouldn't have otherwise have easy access to care. But there was a lot of resistance to teletherapy. There was sort of a sense that it was sort of second rate. It was, the red-haired stepchild to the real therapy, which is in-person therapy. You know, and I would say to people, one day Netflix is going to have a series where there's teletherapy, and that's going to get people to do teletherapy. I never saw the pandemic coming that would get people to try teletherapy. Of course, the pandemic is what happened. Everybody had to switch to teletherapy for a while, or most everybody did. And so that's sort of to norm the use of teletherapy as an effective way to do therapy. And the data is there, by the way. There are thousands of studies and meta studies of the studies that show again and again that the efficacy of teletherapy with video is comparable to the efficacy of in-person therapy. So what we're anticipating post-pandemic is a blend. The thought is we've surveyed clients, we've surveyed our therapists, and we've read national surveys as well that match our own internal surveys, which are that about half the people feel like, I'd like to keep going from home. This sure is handy. Or I can do it on my lunch break at work. That sure is handy. I don't have to drive the 20 minutes to the office. That sure is handy. And there are other people who feel like, and I like being in the office. I like the drive time to the office, and after the therapy, the drive time home where I can process and think about what happened. So we're anticipating about 50% of our clients will want to continue with in-person therapy, and about 50% want to continue with teletherapy. And we're anticipating a pretty even mix going forward in that regard. Topic-wise, what's really interesting, there's a lovely scene from a book. I can't think of the title of the book right now, but they were talking about this therapist that began to work with these people that arrived on this, they were refugees that had taken a boat into the US, and the therapist was going to work with them, and she was all ready to talk about the trauma of the boat ride and all these things. And she said, well, the first person came in their office and said, yeah, she said, and my sister sat beside the guy I really liked, and I couldn't believe she sat beside him on the boat because she knew I liked him, you know, and you know, at the end of the day, we are relational beings, and what impacts us so much are our relationships. And what I find people are talking about very much, whether it's pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and I think post-pandemic, is still going to be to a large extent relational. How our lives are shaped by the relationships we're having, and how do we find our way through those relationships in a way that's caring and compassionate and in integrity with who we really are.
I think it's definitely been an adjustment. I will say that for myself, I had never, ever done a teletherapy session pre-pandemic, ever. And Carl would say, everybody should do teletherapy. And I'd be like, no, I'm not doing teletherapy. I don't want to do teletherapy. And then the pandemic happened and here we were. So I did teletherapy and it's great. I have really come on board with it. I find it to be really just the same. And just to share along with that, in the very beginning of the pandemic, every single client that I had, every single session for probably a couple of months would say, when are we going back in person? When are we going back in person? I'm not kidding, every single time. And now that we've come, a year later plus, the comments now are, can we continue teletherapy? So it really, the adjustment has come completely all the way around. I think now we're all seeing, hey, this works pretty well. This really isn't bad at all. In fact, it's quite convenient and the connection really is still quite palpable. The feeling is all still there. The benefit is still there, and it works great.
That's great. Oh, go ahead, Carl. I don't want to cut you off.
No problem. Yeah, I was just thinking about something. The data into the efficacy of therapy is very inclusive in what is the most effective part of therapy. And what is most important in therapy is not whether your therapist is CBT or EMDR or whatever modality, whatever acronym of modalities they may do. What matters most to the efficacy of the therapeutic relationship is the quality of the relationship between therapist and client. That is always, by a mile, the number one determinant factor around the efficacy and effectiveness of therapy. And what's remarkable is the quality of that relationship can still remain intact and whole, whether you're doing teletherapy or whether you're in person. And that really speaks, I think, very much to the human condition, our longing for connection, our ability to find connection with each other in remarkable ways.
I love that. Oh, go ahead, Lauren. I'm sorry. I keep thinking like they're done.
No,
I better jump in. But no, you go. You just keep
I'm
going.
going to think of something new, and then I'm going to want to say it.
Say it.
The other thing about teletherapy is that, I'm sure all over everywhere, but in Colorado, because that's, it's the state that I know, we have these rural communities that are really resource deprived. And so, like in the Mountain West, where there really aren't as many mental health resources, it gives us the ability to work with people who otherwise don't have nearly the ability to get mental health care. And so that connection that we're talking about, we now have the ability to provide that to people who may not have had the ability to seek that kind of resource. It's really quite incredible. So when, I just think about, we have high rates of suicide in certain areas. And some of that really is because the ability to connect is not there nearly enough to help some of these people who are struggling. And so teletherapy growing in the way that it is, I think will really benefit some of those populations, especially where we don't have the in-person services. So that's a really specific way. I mean, silver lining to the pandemic, right? Teletherapy and other telehealth services are going to benefit a lot of these more rural communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that can be said for a lot of different things we've seen during the pandemic. This necessity to move to teletherapy, teleworking, flexibility with schedules and time that hopefully are here to stay, and I think are here to stay because we were forced into this position to have to use these tools and technologies that maybe we weren't quite comfortable with before. But that is such a great point about rural communities, and I would hope that now that so many of us are used to being on video calls and phone calls and that kind of thing, that it may even be more well received. Yeah,
exactly. And it's not necessarily that telehealth services were not there before. It's that people didn't really think they're like, I don't really want to do that. But now that people see so many people utilizing teleservices, it's exactly that. It's like, it feels more accessible. It feels more like an option that people might be willing to pursue.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got a few minutes left here, but I'm curious. All this we're talking about all these different ways to chat with your therapist and to set up your conversations. But what can you share a little bit? And this may be a tough question, but what does a typical first therapy session look like? And there may not be a typical one, but I'm going to throw that question out there anyway.
Yeah, that's a good question. I loved it when you said this is a tough one. I was like, oh, bring it on.
Lauren, since you wanted to rise up the challenge, would you like to go first?
Sure. A typical first therapy session. So I really like to adapt what a first session looks like to that person who walks in the door. Sometimes that person could walk in really needing something specific. Sometimes, so going back, a first session is usually intended to be an assessment, right? To find out, what is this person needing? Let me get to know them. But occasionally the person walking in that door is not in a space where they can have an assessment be completed. They've just had something really traumatic happen. They're dysregulated. For whatever reason, they need something different in that moment. So that first session is going to really cater to whatever they're needing that space to be at that time. And so my job then is to let that space be what it needs to be. So that's part of the answer is letting it be what it needs to be. Otherwise, though, then my hope is to really get to know that person and let them get to know me enough for us to figure out, at least in a preliminary way, do we want to keep working together? Does this seem like this is a good fit? And I want to get an idea of, what are we looking at in terms of what goals might look like, what a diagnosis might look like. So there's some like really practical things, but overall, I'm trying to build the beginnings of a connection where we can start to have that space that feels really meaningful, that feels special, that is a place that person can, I almost like to think of it as like that space can have almost like a physical feeling to it, where when they think about that therapy room, there is almost like a sensory feeling to it. And that first session sets the foundation for that. So it's really important, right? Like we're building, like, it's like the very first building block for a whole lot of things that come later. But again, the intention is also for that space to be what it needs to be in that moment for that person.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's lovely, Lauren. And I'll just add a little bit to that. I think of what do I want my client to get out of that first session? And as Lauren was talking, I was thinking there's really two core things. One is I want the client to really feel that I get them. That they really feel that they're heard and that they're understood. That someone really understands what their experience is and what they're going through. That they don't have to be alone in going through that anymore. That I'm with them and I understand. The second thing I really want them to get at the first session is hope. Not only do I hear you and understand you, but I know how to help you. And I won't be able to do it all right now today, but I know how to help. I know what to do. And you can come back in here and know that I will guide you in a healing process and you will get better. And that will really be what I believe is going to happen. And if a client can walk away from that first session saying, wow, he really understands me. He really sees me. He really knows me. And he can really help me. Well, that's been a wonderful first session.
That does sound really wonderful. Thank you both. As we wrap up here, I am sure that for all the questions I have asked you tonight, you too get so many more from folks who are just so curious about what you do. Are there any questions that you hear a lot that you'd like to talk about that I haven't asked you tonight?
Oh, gosh.
Well, you've asked a lot of really good ones. How about we start with that statement? Those are good questions today, so thank you. I don't know that. I'll tell you the one question that people will ask me is sort of wanting a really quick feel on an early call on how is this going to work? Like, can you give me a quick feel on how does this work? And I'll say, yeah, I'm really going to take the time to really hear you and understand you. That's really important. And I'm really then going to try to take the time to try to make sure that I understand what we both might agree might be meaningful steps in the healing journey. And then I'm really going to support you in taking those steps and in being with you every step of the way to support you in succeeding in getting there. And that's really the heart of what I'm hoping we can do together. That's probably the other question I get that I try to sometimes offer a short answer to in that way.
And that sparked a thought for me too, is a question that comes up is how long is this going to take? And that's a tough question to answer. And so usually I will kind of tackle that in a, I don't know, my husband would probably say like a therapist-y way, which is to say, oh, well, let's talk about this in a variety of ways. And then I'll probably say something like, we can look at this in a couple of different ways. How long would you envision that you would want this to take? And then get an idea of what somebody's expecting, right? So getting a feel for, do they envision this taking 3 weeks? Do they envision this taking a year? To find out like what are they walking in the door expecting? And then try to bring kind of my own ideas around like, okay, well, here's how timelines can influence what we do, and talk about goal setting, and ultimately really kind of try to say, well, if we have a short period of time, then that's going to impact what we talk about in here. And ultimately, therapy is a really organic process. So things tend to take their own time. We can try to do things in a regimented and paced, measured way. But the likelihood is that as we move along, even if we are having a goal post in mind, things are going to unfold as they will. And then ask, are you willing to hang in there with me? And we'll keep this mile marker in mind, and then reassess as we go, right? So kind of like, let maybe we can try to meet each other in the middle here. But that's a common question about how long will this take? I think it can feel scary at the idea that maybe I'll be in this for a year or more.
Yeah, and I think the answer, as you pointed out, Lauren, is often, we'll decide together. I'm not going to keep you in this chair, but I'm going to welcome you in this chair for as long as you want to be here. And so let's figure it out together. And if in 6 sessions you feel like you've got enough and you would like to leave, of course. And if after 6 sessions you realize that, hey, there's some deeper stuff here and you'd like to stay longer, I'll be right here for you, holding your hand through it, however long you'd like to be here.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, Carl and Lauren, we are just about out of time here, but thank you both so much for coming on to the program tonight. It's been really, really great to get to talk with you both and hear all about the work you do. You are both you have such expertise in your field, and you're such amazing speakers, so eloquent, and I appreciated you answering all of my questions. And so thank you so much for being on tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us. It was fun.
Yeah, thanks so much for letting us be here with you. That was great.
Yeah, I hope you'll be able to join us again in the future.
Thanks so much.
Yeah,
all right. Thank you both.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, thank you to all of you for joining us today on the program. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Lauren and Carl, and I know that I certainly got to really enjoyed getting to hear about all they do in the world of therapy. We do this program every month, so if you want to join us again for another Discovery Live, please visit the museum's website at fcmod.org/events. And if you enjoyed what you saw tonight and you want to help us bring more programming like this to the community, you can always make a donation to Fort Collins Museum of Discovery. You can visit our website as well, or click the donate button here to help us continue to do this great work for the community. Again, thank you all for joining us tonight, and I hope to see you at another virtual speaker series. Have a good night, and thank you.